Kreisky.
Hello and welcome. Welcome to yet another conversation in Bruno Kreisky's Wohnzimmer. As you know, all questions relating to the Middle East and to the larger Middle East have always been very central to the programs and the endeavors of the Bruno Kreisky Forum for International Dialogue. Today we are looking at a very special aspect of Middle East politics, and I'm particularly happy to welcome as our guest today Mr. Philipp Lazzarini, the Commissioner General of UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestinian Refugees. Mr. Lazzarini is also a Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and thus one of the highest ranking persons in the international service. Mr. Lazzarini has had an exemplary career in all issues relating to humanitarian relief, post-conflict, management of post-conflict situations, a career that has led him to almost all the trouble, not all of them, but almost all the trouble spots of the world. He has been in Sudan, he has been in Iraq, he has been in Somalia, he has been also in Sarajevo, he has been in Angola. Lots of experience in handling most difficult post-conflict situations and questions of humanitarian assistance and relief. It is a great honor and a great pleasure to welcome you here at the Bruno Kreisky Forum. Thank you for making time during your brief stay in Vienna for this visit, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. As I'm not sure that all of our viewers know exactly what UNRWA is doing and what its mandate is, I think perhaps we should lay a bit of a groundwork. And could I invite you to tell us a little bit about the fundamentals, so to say, what UNRWA is mandated to do?
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to Bruno Kreisky Forum. And indeed, let me start with UNRWA, because UNRWA, within the broader United Nations family, it's quite a unique agency. It was created in 1949, almost 75 years ago. It was supposed to be a temporary organization, but 75 years ago, we are still here. And we are still here, why? Because there haven't been yet any fair and lasting political solution to the Israel-Palestinian conflict. Now, why is UNRWA unique? UNRWA is unique because it is the only organization which provides directly public-like services to one of the most destitute communities in the Middle East, the Palestinian refugees. We provide education to more than 550,000 girls and boys across the region. We provide primary health care to about 2 million people across the region. We provide a social safety net to the poorest among the poor for nearly 500,000 people, and we are also providing municipal services in the camp across the region. When I say the region, I talk about Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Westbank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, which are the 5 areas of operation of UNRWA.
That brings me directly to a question. In the original mandate of UNRWA, the status of a Palestinian refugee was very narrowly described. It was in the original mandate that the Palestinian refugees only from the years 46 to 48 who had been deprived of their residence, of their life chances, so to say, and rendered refugees. In the meantime, of course, that population has been growing, hasn't it?
Well, it is true that between 46 and 48, between 700,000 and 800,000 people have fled their villages and became refugees. but in fact you are also refugees in other contexts from one generation to the other one if your statehood has not been addressed. Now, when the resolution was decided and adopted, basically the question, the status of the refugees would be and should be addressed through a political process. The political process has never ended and remains still unresolved, and hence why generations later we are still talking about Palestinian refugees. But it's not unique. Most of the people believe that it is unique to UNRWA, but look at other situations across the world. The Western Sahara, you have refugees from one generation to the other one for about 50 years. Look at Afghanistan. Since the 70s, people have been refugees from one generation to the other one. Look at Somalia, the same happened. And even near to us, when we talk about Syria and the million of Syrian refugees in the neighboring countries who just would like to go back but cannot go back because the conditions are not yet met, we are already talking about the second generation of refugee.
How many people are you talking about altogether? You said 500,000 school children that are provided with education. 2 million in social services and health care, but the whole population, do you have an overview how many people you are talking about?
Today we are talking about 5.9 million refugees
5.9 million
registered by UNRWA who have the refugee status. It does not mean that we are servicing 5.9 million refugees. In fact, the people we are servicing are the number indicated in school, 550,000 girls and boys. When it comes to primary health, 2 million people, 500,000 when it's referred to social safety net. In the camp, if you look at the situation in Jordan, Jordan has 2.4 million refugees, but about 400,000 are living in the camp, and these are the people who are primarily serviced by UNRWA. We are not directly servicing the 2.4. So there is often a confusion between the number of people being serviced by the agency and the number of refugees.
Yeah, I understand. But what you are doing is that you basically provide for this refugee population the services that normally a state would provide for them. Education, healthcare, social security, protection also. Yeah? At the same time, it states specifically that the UNRWA mandate is a non-political mandate, is a humanitarian mandate. But in fact, the tasks that you provide are extremely political in their impact.
Most of the time, I describe the activities of UNRWA as an activity focusing on the human development of a destituted and underprivileged population, the Palestinian refugees. And it is true. I mean, by providing education, we provide hope for a better future. We provide prospect to generations of Palestinian refugees. It is also true that the activities or the services we provide are government-like services, they are public services. But we are doing so because host country at the time the refugees arrive decided that it should be under the responsibility of the international community, and this is the reason why in 1949 resolution 302 has been adopted, giving such a task and such a mandate to an agency like UNRWA. And we were expected to be a temporary organization. There was hope at that time that it wouldn't last too long, but unfortunately we ended up 75 later still providing similar services, aligned of course with our time to the Palestinian refugees.
I assume this is also the reason why UNRWA has not an indefinite mandate, but is always sort of mandated for 3 years, in a 3 years rhythm. Hmm?
This is correct. Our mandate has just been renewed in November last year, 2022.
For the next 3 years.
For the next 3 years.
Yeah.
So it's a mandate which is renewed on a 3-year basis, because there is always the hope that there will be a political process, and a political process leading to a political solution. Unfortunately, this has not yet been the case, and next year we will mark the 75th years of the agency. That's definitely not a time to rejoice, because that means the longest lasting unresolved conflict, at least of our modern time, has not been addressed yet. But on the other hand, we can also look at collectively at some of the successes when it comes to human development and the contribution over the last few decades of the Palestinian refugees to the prosperity of the region.
We have quite a number of Palestinian refugees here in Vienna, and I've had a recent meeting with 3 of them who were in the context of a small conference, telling their life stories, sort of how they became refugees and so. 2 of them, the families, not us, the previous generation, have rebuilt their life here, partly first in Lebanon, but then in Austria, through the help of UNRWA, with the education that was provided, with the professional chances that were given to them, and so on. And then they finally made it to Europe and settled here in Vienna. And I recall that UNRWA was for a very short period also part of the UN system here in Vienna. And when the troubles in Lebanon started, and we were privileged to host the organization for a limited period of time.
That is correct, and I indicated also this morning in Vienna during a member state briefing that we were hosted here within the UN premises, I would say from 1975, the beginning of the civil war in Lebanon, until the Oslo Agreement in 1996, once the PLO and the Palestinian leadership moved to Gaza. They asked also UNRWA to move its headquarters back to Gaza. But you are talking about a model of integration. I have to say that every time when I travel, I meet with a lot of pride, people who are former alumni of the UNRWA school, a number of Palestinian ambassadors that I meet in different capitals, and the first thing telling me, I have been in an UNRWA school, either in Gaza, in the Westbank, or elsewhere in the region. And the UNRWA school has always been seen or perceived and felt as a school providing an excellent education and providing, a better chance for a better future for generation of Palestinian refugees.
Before we come to the more detailed issues, I would like to touch on one question, which is always a little bit delicate, but we have to talk about money. And I assume the United States is one of the biggest contributors to the UNRWA budget, still, in spite of some of the political misgivings that were there with the previous administration. I think Saudi Arabia is also a big contributor. I would assume the European Union as well.
So listen, I just come back from a donor pledging conference in New York last week, during which I have described the financial crisis in which UNRWA is as our main existential threat. In fact, people are used to know this agency and to equate it with a financial problem, but this has deepened year after year after year. And in my message to the member states last week, I said, please don't take it as a given anymore, the ability of the agency to muddle through. Our capacity to deliver services with the limited resources we have is eroding, and we are reaching a tipping point, and we might even implode. Our organization, to provide all the services in the region, employs more than 28,000 staff. The bulk of our staff are teachers. Every month, we need to process the salaries. We are the only organization which has a negative cash flow. Our crisis started about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the political environment in which we are in started to change. The Palestinian-Israeli conflict started to be deprioritized. The political process started to be stalled. New regional dynamic in the region, less attention being brought to the region, and hence the resources of UNRWA started to stagnate. At the time, needs have significantly increased. The region was hit by multiple crises, costs have increased, and being the only lifeline of the people, not being able to fully deliver on the expectation, a lot of despair, distress has grown in the region. Now, when it comes to the funding, I told the member state, how can we continue? We are locked into a statu quo between the expectation for us to deliver on the mandate, costs having increased, resources stagnating, and in the region, because of the absence of a political process, communities and hosts are reluctant to support any transformation of service delivery because they see it as an attempt to dismantle the organization and or to weaken the future right of the Palestinian refugees. In this context, there is also a lot of domestic politics at play. You mentioned the US. The US are disengaged financially under the previous Trump administration. With the new administration, they re-engage. But what does it tell us? It tells us that today the bipartisan support we used to enjoy is not here anymore, and our main donor is becoming unpredictable. It will very much depend on how the domestic politics will unfold in the future. We have also seen with the Arab country a significant decrease over the last few years, which is also very much related to bilateral relation or regional dynamic. The Gulf country, for example, represented 25% of our income in 2018, only 3% in 2021. Now there is a return of some of the Gulf country because of new dynamic in the region, and I'm hopeful that they will be fully back. When it comes to Europe, they have been a steady, fast, predictable partners. Between the EU and its member state, they represent more than half of the contribution of the agency.
That's very encouraging, but still the situation remains, as you said, very precarious.
Very, very precarious. It's our main threat today. Yeah. And I know, for example, that beyond September of this year, I have absolutely no indication of new income to help the agency to end the year. When I was in New York, I called for $150 million just to survive, just to make sure that our services can continue till the end of the year. And in addition of that, we need also $75 million just to keep the food pipeline in Gaza, where almost the entire population relies on international assistance. In fact, Gaza is what I would describe as being an artificial humanitarian welfare society. Today, 4 up to 5 people depend on our assistance, whereas before 2005, before all the restriction, there were only 80,000 people depending on international assistance.
As you know, Mr. Lazzarini, my own background is foreign affairs, and I have sort of the professional orientation always to look at the larger picture. And I see that UNRWA not only provides these basic services to a refugee population, but that its work, and through its work, it's also an important factor of regional stability throughout the whole, the larger Middle East. Yeah, if UNRWA were to stop providing these services, it would be would have probably catastrophic results.
I can't agree more, and this is also the rationale for many of the donors to continue to support UNRWA the way they have supported UNRWA. The stability element, there is a very close link between providing and ensuring the human development of a community and promoting stability at the same time, and especially in such a highly volatile region. You are right, there are some situations. Let's say that tomorrow UNRWA implodes. What does it mean in a place like Gaza? In Gaza, we have 300,000 girls and boys in our school. 3/4 of the population depend on the services being provided by UNRWA. We have 15,000 staff working for the organization. We are the second biggest employer. We represent about 25% of the GDP of the Gaza Strip. We stop tomorrow, it will be a total disaster. Then your expectation, I mean, we can compare your expectation to mine, but if we have no school, where are these children going? What kind of prospect and future are we offering to them? This is a recipe for disaster. And this is also one of the reasons why I keep saying that it is on our common interest to have a predictable UNRWA rather than having an unpredictable and unsettling organization. Because whenever we say we will not be able to cover salaries or services, we unsettle the communities, we fuel despair and distress in the camp, we unsettle our staff, we unsettle the host country, saying, but we do not want you to become a source of instability. Donors start to question, but we have been committed with you so long, how come this is not yielding a better predictability? And ultimately also Israel, whether there is disagreement or not about the reason of being of UNRWA, for the time being, in the absence of an alternative, it is also in their interest that we do function properly, both in the Westbank and in the Gaza Strip.
Of course. The Palestinians have always had a reputation that they are extremely, like the Israelis in a way, extremely education-minded and education conscious. From your own experience now during the last years, the interest in education, in schooling, in higher education is a pronounced one. And I remember reading that UNRWA is also cooperating with the local school systems in the various countries of operation. So in order to guarantee that after elementary schooling they can move on to university careers and secondary and tertiary educational branch.
No, that's true. The Palestinians are really known to invest a lot in education. Sometimes they just say because education should be the only thing no one can really take out of us. Many of them have been displaced.
It's also the best guarantee for the future.
It's a guarantee for the future. Yeah. I would say it's a little bit across the region. You have the Palestinian, you said the Israeli, but when you go to Lebanon also, this is also a culture where people invest a lot in education and in a better future, basically. That's the rationale behind it. Now it is true that our curriculum in each of the host country is in line with the curriculum of the host country, so that after primary and secondary school, our student can apply to university in the country where we do operate. In general, we are very proud of our education system. First, we are the only one who have reached gender parity. We are the only one having a human rights curriculum. We had a number of assessments by third party, including the World Bank, who basically say we are highly value for money, 25% less than the similar services by the public service in the region, but most of the time our students are high achiever and in average end up 1 year ahead than other children in similar circumstances. So this education part we are very proud. Having said that, you know, we had COVID recently. We had a number of situations of a crisis, and like other children across the region or across the world, we have also recorded quite a lot of learning loss recently.
There was, a couple of years ago, there was this issue about the school books. Has that been resolved? The question of sort of incendiary language, discriminatory language.
Yeah. You know, the issue of the school books.
I'm asking because after I left the Foreign Service, active Foreign Service, I was also for a couple of years head president of the Austrian UNESCO Commission. And thus I remember that UNESCO was involved in these issues. Absolutely.
To start with, the director of education in UNRWA, supervising 20,000 teachers and 550,000 students, is appointed by UNESCO within the organization. So for us, the UNESCO standards are very important. Is the problem of the textbook solved? No, it pops up on a regular basis. It's a source of concern in a number of donor countries, and rightly so. Now, as UNRWA, we use the textbook of the host country, we follow their curriculum, and basically, when it comes to the textbook in Palestine, we are going through all the books. So every year, the new books, and there are 10 to 15,000 of new pages, and we are looking at the issue through 3 different lenses. The first one is what you indicated, the gender perception and the age appropriateness, which indeed indicate that there are a number of problems which needs to be addressed, and we are addressing through guidance provided to the teacher on how to teach it at school. Then you have a large number of problems, I would say the bulk, but more related to issues of identity, the Israeli identity or the Palestinian identity, and in a situation of unresolved conflict, it's difficult to reconcile 2 different narratives of the ongoing conflict. But for this, most of the time, as a United Nations organization, we have UN language. We make our determination when it comes to the use of a map before 1948 or after 1948. We have language related to occupation. We have a language related to the barrier. So on this issue, we have proper guidance to be provided. And the third category, which is the smallest category, but certainly the most controversial category and the most looked at, will be related to whatever can be perceived as not being in line with UNESCO and UN value, mainly issues related to discrimination or incitement to violence. As an organization, we have a zero tolerance policy. If really we have this kind of example in our books, we will ultimately ask the teacher not to teach this part of the material in our school. But for most of the issue, I would say 98, 99% of the issues that we have in the textbook, we have the necessary guidance we can provide to the teacher to proceed.
Yeah. If in such a conflict with such a long history and so much emotional involvement, it is not surprising, it is very difficult to establish sort of one narrative that is then entering into all the school books that are used throughout the region. I remember from our own experience, we have had a bilateral commission working with Italy on a common textbook for schools, and the commission has been working for over 20 years till they finally achieved a common joint narrative for them. So it is, I think the main thing is that this is under control and that UNRWA is not opening itself to criticism here, and that I think it's a very good move that the Director for Education is coming from UNESCO and is mandated with supervising the quality of the textbooks. That's probably a very good step.
And maybe also on this issue, I see also a lot of potential with digitalization of the learning, the distance learning, because basically we can also better centralize the guidance we are providing to the teacher and to the students who can directly access, in fact, the pedagogic guidance that the agency can provide. And this is also one of the reasons, accelerated by conflict, accelerated by COVID, that we are investing, in fact, quite a lot in digitalizing our education services within the organization. And that should also help us to promote a better understanding on what I would say controversial issues. But you are right about Europe. I keep also using, in fact, the time Europe had needed. And even today, we might still not always agree on a common narrative for some issues.
One of the most difficult issues.
Exactly.
Yeah. Could I come for a moment to the question of the social services that you provide? Yeah. How does that work? People come to UNRWA to register and demand social service or social help, or is this something that is distributed over the field to everybody, or how does it function?
So basically we have two elements: the social services, the social cases of basically these are the poorest among the poor living in the refugee camp. This is a group of people that the agency knows quite well, because people living in the camp have been registered by the agency since the day of their birth. They are followed up through our health center. The children are in our school, so we know very well, in fact, in the various microcosm of the camp, who is in need. The only problem is sometimes it's difficult to do a difference between abject poverty and abject poverty. It's such a thin line, but on the other hand, the agency does not have the means to cover the need of everybody. So all in all, we talk about maximum 500,000 people across the region, across all the Palestinian refugee camp. Most of the time, it's an assessed need, so it's not that the person comes to us and asks for assistance. It's like a social service of a public service. I guess in Vienna it would be exactly the same, but we will assess the situation of the family and see if yes or not it fits the criteria. But sometimes it even fits the criteria, but the agency has no means to increase the number of people who will be covered through our social safety net. Then we have also a layer of, I would say, chronic humanitarian needs, and here we have about 2 million people across the region, the bulk coming from Gaza, who rely on food assistance and cash assistance. And this, most of the time, can also complement the assistance to the poorest among the poor. We have also a number of social workers helping us to identify precarious situation within the community. For example, household led by single mothers having no job opportunities or being ostracized by part of the communities. Social workers help us to identify the people in need.
In those cases, and especially in the deplorable situation in the camps, are you cooperating also with other humanitarian relief organizations, such as the Red Cross? Or I'm asking for a very personal reason, because I'm also on the board of CARE Austria, and I know that CARE is involved in, especially in refugee camps in Jordan.
I think you have the good example of CARE, because if they are involved in if they are involved in Palestinian refugees camp in Jordan, that means they will partner and cooperate also with UNRWA. We have multiple, in fact, partnership with local NGOs, with other UN agencies, with UNICEF in child protection, with WHO when it comes to primary health or promoting a standard. We have multiple partnerships, and which vary from one field to the other one, but we have a partnership with community-based organizations, local NGOs, we have partnership with the Palestinian Red Crescent, we have partnership with international NGOs, but also with a number of other UN agencies, whether it comes to provide these human development services such as education or primary health, but we have also partnership when it comes to providing humanitarian assistance or even rehabilitation, like we have done it recently in Daraa in Syria with UN Habitat when we rehabilitated the school and also a number of shelters. I have, however, tried to promote broader partnership, institutional partnership, in order to find ways to address the precarity in which the agency is in. And this kind of partnership, when I start to suggest that agencies or other organizations could implement activities on behalf of the agency, this has provoked a very strong pushback from communities and the host country, who saw behind this type of partnership an attempt to hand over responsibility to others, and by handing over, they saw an attempt to weaken the agency and its mandate, and through this they see also a weakening of the future right of the Palestinian refugees. Meaning by this that all this, depending on the nature of the partnership, depending also on the nature of the activities, most of the time in this context, things are seen through a political lens.
Yeah, shows that you are operating in a minefield, never knowing which one is going to go
As a
off.
joke, sometimes I say, even talking about garbage collection or suggesting that it can be handed over to a third party or to municipal services is also seen and felt through a political lens.
I can imagine, yes. I would like to touch, once again, we spoke about it at the beginning, but I would like to speak, to go perhaps a little bit deeper into the question of the relationship to the European Union and the hopes that you might have also for the continuing assistance. And that, of course, in a way is linked also to the political developments in the United States, which we don't know. We have presidential elections 2024. The outcome is very uncertain, but it might come to a situation that is very hazardous for UNRWA.
It is definitely hazardous, and I have to say I look at election more and more with anxiety, not only in the US, but also in Europe, because depending on the outcome of the election, depending on the type of coalition being put in place, we might have a government who might be more supportive to Israel, less to the Palestinian, or a government more supportive to the Palestinian. But what I try to say here is that we have more unpredictability, the reliability of long-standing donor start to be questioned. Europe is still very, very strong. But when it comes to other countries, we have seen with the US, it has become unreliable, and this unreliability will prevail. But before the US, we had also a government in Canada which decided to stop the funding to the organization, and later on, with the current government, they are again a strong supporter of the agency. We have seen the same also in Australia. So the world in which we are in, you know, the long-term predictability and reliability of partnerships that we used to have with a donor is not anymore the same today.
Yeah. I think what we will have in the European Union is, of course, the fact that even if you have one country that for political reasons might be wavering a little bit in the support, it will always be counterbalanced to another country that stays solid. Yeah. And then you have, of course, one big factor, and that's the European Parliament. And the European Parliament, I think, has all, together with the Commission, one has to say, have always been unwavering in their commitment, I think.
No, that's correct. I think in the EU, we have a very, very strong partner to the agency. And I know that the European Parliament will go now also for election. We'll have a new commission, but we have already signed now a 7 years agreement, and I have no indication that this will ever be a question. And I do believe that being a group of 27 countries, that indeed helps.
For the time being, we have to say.
For the time being. But again, you know, there have been development over the last few years no one would ever have expected, and they have taken place. So I would never ever take as fully granted in the long term a commitment or a partnership. It can be reversed, and it can be easily reversed. And this is what the agency now has experienced over the last 10 years.
You are spending a few days here in Vienna, so we have perhaps should touch also on the bilateral relations. Is there any message that you would like to convey to an Austrian audience? Some wishes that you might have?
Listen, over the last few years, Austria has increased its support and contribution to the agency. It's still relatively modest, so I still believe that there is room for beefing up the contribution of Austria. But beyond the bilateral partnership that we have, Austria plays also an important role within the European institution, and we count on Austria also to, to convey and to support and to advocate on behalf of UNRWA within the European institution and the Commission, and also as a UN member state to support us in our discussion within the fifth committee, which is in charge, in fact, of the assessed contribution. Over the last year, we have requested an increase of assessed contribution, and European countries were in support of the ask of the agency. So Austria is an important partner which can play in different fields to support the agency.
Okay, message received. How is the relationship between the assessed part of your budget and the contributions from member states?
We are part of the regular budget of the United Nations.
Yeah.
So the assessed contribution represent maximum 5% of the overall budget of the agency.
Yeah.
We have, basically they represent about $35 million per year. We have a core budget of $850 million. And if we take the core budget plus the emergency appeal, the overall budget of the agency is $1.5 billion. So the assessed contribution primarily help us to cover the administrative and the managerial aspect of the organization.
As I said in the beginning, the Bruno Kreisky Forum for International Dialogue has always had a particular interest in the developments in the Middle East. And we have various strains of activity here, mainly not so much in the event field, but in organizing very low-key, confidential, think tank-like meetings, bringing people together from the region, trying to explore also a bit different approaches, thinking out of the box, what can be avenues that can be explored and so on. And I think this is extremely important for perhaps bringing fresh approaches also to this extremely difficult issue that has been with us for such a long time.
I definitely, would welcome this kind of discussion, more confidential, at least at the level of the brainstorming, before bringing it to the broader audience. We desperately need it. Next year, as I said, we mark the 75th. We need to overcome the statu quo in which we are locked in today. We have tried different avenues over the last few years by promoting a compact, by promoting partnership, by promoting increased assessed contribution. None of this avenue has been the game changer the agency needs. I do believe the agency needs to have a proper debate with member states regarding what in the future should be our common duty and commitment vis-à-vis Palestinian refugees, including in the absence of a political solution. And this discussion for the agency is absolutely existential and vital.
Are you planning any special event for the 75th anniversary?
Well, there are two aspects. There will certainly be some events next year, but in parallel, I would like to initiate a process of reflection about the future sustainability of the agency. And this has been a message I have conveyed in New York to the member states. We need to find a way because for the time being, in the absence of any political framework, the agency is completely locked, is in a total impasse, and time is definitely not in our favor right now. We need to address it.
Yes, but the 75th anniversary could be a very good point to get the public momentum also around it.
I agree. My fear sometimes is the 75th will be next year. I still do not know how I will bridge between this year and next year. But if we succeed to bridge, and we will, and we should, with the support of member states, indeed part of the focus and the reflection will be about the future sustainability under the 75th. It's a perfect occasion.
Mr. Commissioner General, I thank you very much for this conversation, and I give you all the best wishes for this extremely important work. And as I said before, the message for what you need, what UNRWA needs, has been very well received, and I think we'll also find a response by our audience. Thank you very much for being with us, and as I said, all the best.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Pleasure.